How's it going, everyone? And this video is about when to use the rear brake. I've been asked a whole bunch of times about making a video specifically about this since I made my video called Your Best Friend, the Brakes, where I mainly talk about the front brake and about trail braking. So go back and watch that if you want to, but now this is specifically about the rear brake. All right, so when to use the rear brake. So there's a lot of variables, right? It always depends. Your skill, preference, the pace you're going, the traction you have, what you feel like doing, your comfort level, where are you at, location, like public roads or on the track, etc. So first, public roads. So sometimes I'm out in the twisties, right, at a certain pace, and sometimes I just only use the rear. Maybe that's enough to slow me down for the corners because I'm just going at an easy pace. I just want to feel how the bike behaves just by using the rear brake only. Of course, I'm still ready with the front brake just in case something happens because the front brake is the majority of the power, but sometimes I just only do rear. Other times if I'm practicing, maybe I do front only, and maybe sometimes I do both, or maybe I use the front just to get the bike to slow down, and then I transition from the front to the rear as I go through the corner. It all depends. But rear brake specifically, sometimes I do go and practice and I only touch the rear brake out in the twisty roads. If I'm practicing emergency braking, you want to stop as fast as you can. So once you get on the front brake, the suspension collapses and all the weight goes to the front. So the rear of the bike is getting lighter and lighter. You see that? As the suspension collapses, right, you're rolling, the suspension collapses, it goes down, all the weight goes to the front. That means the rear end is getting lighter. So the rear brake technique for emergency braking is you start off with a little bit of pressure and then you taper off. It's light to lighter. Because if you would just push down on the rear brake during emergency braking, either the tire will start skidding immediately or the ABS is just going to engage. Click, 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 click. The rear ABS should never engage if you're practicing emergency braking. How could it? You're going light to lighter, right? So that's the technique for emergency braking. If I'm practicing low speed drills, like MotoJitsu drills in a parking lot, I mostly use the rear brake. What I recommend is when you're doing white belt drills, no brakes. Just rely on the clutch and the throttle and just get really good at that. I found with people practicing, if you start to use the rear brake too soon, it becomes like a crutch and you don't really understand the clutch yet. And the clutch is like the main thing. If you feel like the bike is gonna fall, ease out the clutch a little bit and the bike will stand right back up. So you just gotta get the feel of doing that through a whole bunch of repetitions. So white belt, no rear brake. Once you get up to blue belt, going all the way through black belt, and now you're practicing the low speed drills for MotoJitsu, then yes, use the rear brake. But I recommend for white belt, no. So most of the time if I'm doing low speed technical stuff, I used a lot of rear brake. I say mostly rear brake because it also depends. If I'm going faster, like MotoGymkhana style riding, I also use the front brake. You see what I'm saying? It's like what Lee Park said, MotoGymkhana type stuff is like a one-man band. You're pretty much doing all four extremities at once. Right? You're using your rear brake, your front brake, you're using the clutch, the throttle, etc. You might even shift up to second gear, then back down to first. It depends how big the course is and the speeds you're going, etc. Anyway. So if I'm just riding around the community, city streets, right? So if I come up to a stop sign or a stoplight, sometimes I only use the front only. Sometimes I use the both. Sometimes I just use rear only. And that depends, right? Is it wet outside? Then most of the time I'm just going at lower speeds since it's wet and raining. And I just mostly use the rear. If I come up to the stop sign or the stop line, there's a little bit of gravel or sand or it looks kind of slippery conditions. Most of the time I just mostly use the rear. But then if it's dry and clean, I'm coming up to the stoplight and it's a green light, but then it turns yellow and I need to stop. Well then, if I need to stop a little bit quicker, of course I would go to the front to do that. But mostly all the time, whenever I come up to a stoplight or a stop sign, I start to use both brakes, right? Start to use the brakes to get the bike to slow down. But the last 2 feet or so before I actually come to a stop, I'm off completely the front brake and I'm only using that rear brake to actually come to a stop. And usually like right before I actually come to a stop, my left foot goes down only. I keep my right foot on the rear brake. And once I'm off the front brake, I usually lift my right hand up and I lift up my visor because I had it closed when I'm actually riding. I lift up my visor, I have sunglasses on to get a little airflow, and my left foot stays down, my right foot's on the peg on the rear brake. I'm close to the friction zone, just getting ready to go. Light turns green, then I could go. So most of the time, that's what I do whenever I come to a stop. Usually both brakes to start, and then once I get the majority of the braking done with the front, because that's all the power anyway, then I transition to easing off the front as I add more to the rear, more and more and more to the rear as like the last 2 or 3 feet to actually come to a stop. Most of the time, that's what I do. Unless I just simply feel like doing something different, maybe I'll only use rear, only use front, but majority default, that's usually what I do. Both or front only, then I transition to the rear the last couple feet. If I'm on the twisties, so rear brake. So I mentioned a second ago on the twisties, but here's a little bit more in depth, okay? So first, a lot depends on the pace. If I'm just chilling at an easy pace, well then sometimes I don't use the front brake at all. Sometimes I just only use the rear. And a lot of times I go practice only using the rear just to get comfortable doing that to see what the bike feels like. Other times, let's say I'm going a little bit quicker and I need to use the front. Sometimes I'm in a straight line. I use the front to get the majority of the slowing down, and then I ease off the front as I increase the rear. So if I'm braking like 40%, then I ease off to like 10, then I kind of add 10%, then I transition from the 10 that was in the front to the 10 that's in the rear. And then as I tip the bike in, maybe I just keep that 10% or I trail braking off the rear brake as I go through the corner. And sometimes if I'm going at a pace or I just feel like doing it just to practice as well, I'm going. As I roll off the throttle, engine braking, as I roll off the throttle, I start to add a little bit of rear brake to get the bike initially to slow, and then I transition to the front to get the majority of the slowing down with all the power of the front brake, and then I transition off the front brake back to the rear brake a little bit to get the little bit, like the first 5 and 10%, maybe I just use the rear brake, and the majority of the braking is like the 70%, in the middle is the front, then the little bit on the ends are rear, or a combination of all that stuff. Not to say that I do that all the time, but just for fun, to practice it, why not? And if there's less traction, if it's wet outside, or if I'm doing lower speed maneuvers out in the twisties, right? Then most of the time, if I am gonna use the brakes, if I need to, then I just mostly use the rear. That doesn't mean in the wet I can't use the front. It obviously only depends on the technique. Sometimes I use the front brake only all the time in the wet, even slowing down aggressively. Obviously, if you grab the brake, nothing's going to happen if you're in the dry or in the wet or anything else. It all depends on the technique. Very slow, easy squeezing. It all depends on the technique of what you're doing. The brake, the front big old brake is not the problem. The person in the mirror is the problem. The bike's not at fault. You are. If you do something dumb, like you grab the brake and flip over the handlebars, well, it's not the bike's fault. The bike would have sat there forever without you on top of it. But you're the one who decided to grab, and that's what made the suspension overload and you're going flying. Or you'll just skid out and the front tire will just slip out from underneath you, and that's a low side crash. Either way, the brake's not the problem, the riders are the problem. So specifically with trail braking, okay? So let's think about this. So this is before the corner, there's zero lean. So here you are, right? And then, so before the corner, you're going in a straight line, you add, this is just rear brake only. So sometimes I trail brake only with the rear, exactly like how I'm about to explain. So you're going in a straight line, you're getting ready for the corner. So I'm starting to roll off the throttle a little bit, which is engine braking, and then 0% rear brake, then I go to 5, 10, 15% rear brake, right? That's the bike straight up and down. And then right here, I start to lean. So as I start to lean, now I'm at 15% rear brake, then I trail off brake pressure. So I'm at 15, I'll go this way so you can see 15, 14, 13, 10, 10. I'm trailing off the rear brake as you lean the motorcycle, the same you would do with the front brake. And then as I'm leaning, and then the more and more you lean, the more and more I trail off. But let's say this is a blind corner, okay? So I'm going left through a blind corner, 5, 10, 50%. I start to lean. Now I start to trail off. And maybe I just get down to 5%. I just hold the brake light on. I just wait, 5%, 5%, 5%, 5%, 5%, until I could actually see the exit to make sure there's nothing in the way. There's not a person doing a U-turn. There's not a big branch in the middle of the road or a deer or whatever else. So a lot of the times for blind corners, I keep a little bit of pressure either on the front or on the rear just until I see the exit. And I highly recommend doing that for blind corners. Front or rear or both, I recommend keeping just a little bit of percentage until you see the exit. Now, a lot of people ask me this, so I might as well go ahead and say it. So as I'm going, right, I'm rolling off the throttle, right, no front brake, so I'm rolling only rear brake. I'm rolling off the throttle a little bit, maybe it's not even to zero. Maybe I just roll off 10% as I'm going through the brake pressure, right? Now, as the bike starts, so say I'm slowing down from 50 miles per hour to 30 miles per hour. Once I get to 30 miles per hour, if I just lean the motorcycle, the bike will continue to slow down because I'm on a smaller rotation. On the edge of the tire is a smaller circumference than the middle of the tire. So as I start to lean, the bike will continue to slow. But I want to go through the corner at 30. So I'm rolling off 50, 45, 40, 35, I'm using a little bit of rear brake, I get down to 30, and this is my comfortable speed for the corner, 30. Right when I begin to lean, I want to go 30. So as I start to lean the bike over, I twist the throttle a tiny bit just to maintain 30 miles per hour, right? As I start to lean, steady throttle, 30, 30, 30, easy, and then I was 15% rear brake, and I trail off the rear brake as I'm holding a little tiny bit. Once I get to a little bit of twist of the throttle to maintain my speed, then I just hold it there. I'm not accelerating. Accelerating can only happen when you see the exit and take a weight lean angle. Twisting the throttle a tiny bit to maintain your speed, that is not acceleration, two very different things. And obviously, everything I just explained, that takes a lot of dexterity and coordination and focused attention to what you're doing, because you're giving a little bit of gas, you're on the rear brake, and you're leaning all at the same time. That's why trail braking is not a beginner technique. It's not for beginner riders. It takes a lot. It takes a lot of experience, a lot of education, a lot of focused practice to really learn how to do all this stuff. But you can absolutely, just like I explained, trail brake with the rear brake. So let me just tell you what I do. So everybody's wondering, like, okay, there's a lot of things to practice. I should go practice everything. I understand the benefit of it. What do I personally do? So yes, practice everything, get comfortable. So at stop signs, at stoplights, most of the time what I do, my default, my normal riding, I use both brakes. I transition from the front. I only use the rear the last couple feet. That's mostly what I do. If I'm doing low speed practice, I mostly use rear. If I'm in the twisties and I'm going at an easy pace, now my easy pace might be your 80% pace, but my skill and understanding and the roads that I know and everything else, at an easy pace for me, if I'm just cruising, right, most of the time I just use engine braking, which is simply rolling off the gas, and rear brake. That's mostly what I do. Now, if I feel like going at a little bit faster paced, most of the time I only use the front. If I am going at a faster pace, it's never only rear, because the rear doesn't have enough power to actually slow me down because of the rate at which I'm coming into the corner. The rear brake ain't gonna do it. So I need to use the front to actually slow my bike down. But most of the time, if I'm going at a faster pace, I don't do anything with my rear brake. Unless I'm specifically practicing front brake to get majority of the slowing down, then I add a little rear brake. So I'm 10% front brake, 10% rear brake, and then maybe I trail off both as I go in. Remember, this is a lot of dexterity, a lot of things. Now, if I'm at a track riding, me personally, I only use the front. I don't touch the rear at all. That's just me. I know a lot of people way faster than me, way slower than me, that use both brakes. Rear brake a lot. Rear brake coming out of the corner. So if you come out of the corner, I know some people that are really hard on the rear brake as they're coming out of the corner accelerating, because there's so much power coming out of the corner, the bike wants to wheelie, and using a little bit of rear brake will keep the front end down. So they're literally holding the rear brake down as they're full throttle coming up out of the corner as they're accelerating. That's them. For me personally, with my skill and understanding, and I'm not a fast track rider, that's for sure, I just only use the front. That's just me. So on a track, it's completely different than the street riding, right? The goal is to go as fast as you possibly can. How fast can I get this lap? And that's up to you on how to do it. Just think of professional racers, right? Look at the different styles from 5 different people, yet they're going around the track at almost the same times. How you'd get around the track the fastest is up to you, right? Some people use lots of rear brakes, some people use a little bit, some people use a mixture. So when I was at American Super Camp, I was talking to Danny Walker, who owns the whole thing, and then Jake Gagne. He's a superbike professional racer. Look him up on Instagram, he's awesome, right? So they're telling me for one weekend of racing, he went through 3 rear brake rotors in a weekend. That means Jake Gagne on his superbike is using the rear brake so much, so often, he destroyed the pads, heated up the rotors, it got too warped, he had to replace the rotor. And he did that 3 times in a weekend. When I go to the track, I only use the front brake only, I don't even touch the rear. But I mean, look at the level of difference between Jake Gagne, his knowledge and skill and reflexes and everything else. He's a professional racer. He's like a 20th degree black belt, and I'm not even a white belt compared to skill of me and a professional racer, right? And I'm gonna put this in the link in the description below. So look up Scott Redding. He's a former MotoGP rider. There's a video of him riding around. The camera is like right here, and it shows his foot and how much he uses the rear brake when he's riding around at the track. It is unbelievable how much he uses that rear brake, and when he does it, it's absolutely fascinating to watch. I'll put that link in the description, and I highly recommend you watching that. And keep in mind, some people find the rear brake to be so useful and beneficial at the top level, at the highest level. They put a thumb-mounted rear brake when they're going to the right, because obviously their foot's gonna get in the way if they're trying to use the rear brake when they're going to the right. If I'm using the rear brake and I start to lean, well, they damn near have their heads on the ground, so their foot's gonna get caught. So to keep your foot up on the peg, but still had the benefit of using the rear brake, they put a left-handed mounted rear brake so they could use the rear brake with their thumb. Absolutely fascinating. So rear brake definitely has its place, but just like I mentioned, the only time I speak about professional racers is when I'm saying how much I'm in awe of their skill and pace and everything else, because I'm nowhere near anything of their level of anything side by side. So I just watch in awe and say, this is amazing, go watch it. Go look at Jake Gagne's Instagram, go watch him racing, look up Scott Redding, look at that link in the description. It's fascinating. So there's definitely a time and place, but I also know professional racers who don't use the rear brake at all as well. It all depends, all depends. Okay, so what's the bottom line? Because Stone Cold said so, right? His head's a little bit small for his body. But do you guys even watch racing, or wrestling, what I'm talking about? I actually loved wrestling when it was Stone Cold, The Rock, and Mankind, and anyway. So the bottom line is learn and practice everything with the rear brake. Different environments, different situations. I recommend practicing with the rear brake, getting used to it, getting comfortable with it. But whatever you go to default should be after you've already practiced everything there is in order to learn what you like the most, right? Experiment and feel how that rear brake affects your comfort, your handling, what it does. So there you go, everyone. Hopefully that gives you some clarity about the rear brake. Thank you for watching. Hit subscribe. Go check out that video in the description, and I'll see you guys later.